The third morning of November brought rain against the east windows of Thornvale Hall, and by 9 o'clock the whole house had agreed that the Earl was dying. Miss Rosalind Wake heard it first from the stairs, where she had stopped with a slate under one arm and a child's mitten in her hand. Below her, in the marble hall, the physician's boy was pulling on his coat too quickly, and the under-butler was speaking in the particular hush that servants reserve for the failure of the man who pays them. The word going round was fever. High fever, the kind that had taken the Earl's own father in a fortnight, and the housekeeper had already sent to the village for more ice than any living person could use. Rosalind stood very still on the fourth step and listened, because listening was the only privilege her position afforded her. "He will not last the week," said Mrs. Pruitt the housekeeper to the cook, and her voice did not shake at all. "We should be sensible. There is the question of the dower house, there is the question of the girls. There is the question of the governess," said the cook. Mrs. Pruitt made a small sound. "She is a hired woman with a good accent. Nothing more. The new master will not want her." A hired woman with a good accent. Rosalind's fingers closed around the mitten until the wool went damp in her palm. 26 years old, 4 years in this house. And that was the whole of her, spoken aloud, in a corridor, by a woman who had eaten at her table every day since Michaelmas. What she did not yet know was that the Earl of Thornvale was not dying, and that the fever burning in his chamber that morning had been manufactured out of a hot brick, a closed window, and a very great deal of despair. She went up to the schoolroom and taught the girls their sums. That is where this begins, and I will ask only one thing of you before it does. Stay with her. She is easy to overlook. The house had made an art of it. Rosalind Wake had come to Thornvale in the autumn of 1814, with 1 trunk, 3 gowns, and a letter of character from a clergyman who had known her father. Her father had been a physician in Norwich, a good one, a man who had taught his daughter Latin because there was no son to teach it to, and who had died owing £400 to a wine merchant and a landlord. The debt had eaten the house, the books, the surgery, and finally the piano, which had gone out through the front door on a Tuesday while she watched from the window and did not weep, because weeping would have given the men carrying it something to talk about in the street. She had learned then what her worth was, as the world reckoned worth. It was £400, and she had not had it. At Thornvale she taught 2 girls. Georgiana was 9 and serious, and had her father's straight dark brows. Anne was 6, and had opinions about horses. Their mother had been dead 3 years. Their father, Julian Havard, the 5th Earl of Thornvale, was 34 years old, and lived in the house the way weather lives in a valley, present everywhere, spoken to by no one. Rosalind had exchanged perhaps 40 sentences with him in 4 years. She could have recited every one. The house had a shape, and the shape was this: Mrs. Pruitt ran the household, and had run it since the Earl was a boy, and she understood the order of things, with the confidence of a woman who had never once been outside it. Mr. Crail, the steward, kept the books and the tenants and a quiet ledger of his own opinions. Lady Havard, the Earl's aunt, came down from London 4 times a year with her companion, and a great deal of advice about the girls' futures. And through all of it moved the servants. And among the servants, though not quite of them, moved the governess, who ate alone, who was too educated for the kitchen and too poor for the drawing-room, and whom the house had decided some time ago was furniture that could read. She did not mind. That was the thing she told herself. On the days it was true. The fever had begun on the 2nd of November, and it had begun because Julian Havard had spent an evening in his study, listening to his steward tell him a number. The number was £11,000. It was what the estate would fetch if it were broken and sold, and Mr. Crail had brought it because a cousin of the Earl's, one Mr. Vincent Sharp, had written twice from Bath in the space of a month to inquire with great delicacy after his lordship's health. Mr. Sharp was the heir presumptive. Mr. Sharp had never seen Thornvale. Mr. Compitas Sharp had, in his second letter, asked whether the Earl had considered the girl's guardianship in the event of any misfortune, and had been kind enough to volunteer. Julian had read the letter twice and set it down, and looked at the fire for a long while. He had been ill in September, genuinely 3 days of it, and he had noticed something during those 3 days, but he could not stop noticing afterward. The house had changed, not toward him, around him. Doors had been left ajar that were normally shut. His aunt had arrived within 40 hours. Uninvited, Mrs. Pruitt had begun on the second day to speak of him in the past tense in the corridor outside his door, and had not known that the door was open. He had recovered, and the house had rearranged itself back into deference, and he had lain awake for 6 weeks afterward wondering which version of it was the true one. So on the 2nd of November, he put a hot brick, wrapped in flannel, into his bed, closed the window, refused his dinner, and sent for the physician. Dr. Hollis, who was 70 and half deaf and had known Julian since he was born, felt his brow, found it hot, and pronounced a fever of concerning aspect. It was not a clever plan. It was a tired one. He wanted, with a want he could not have named aloud in any drawing-room in England, to know whether a single person in his own house would come to his bedside for a reason other than arithmetic. By the third morning he had his answer, and it was worse than he had feared, and he had begun to understand that he could not stop. Rosalind was not permitted into the Earl's wing. That was the arrangement, and had always been the arrangement. She learned what the house learned, from the trays that went up and the faces that came down, and what she learned by the 4th day was that the trays were coming back full. She stopped Sarah on the back stairs. Sarah was 17 and carried the trays and had a way of holding her shoulders that meant she had been scolded recently. "He is not eating," Rosalind said. "He will not, miss. Pruitt says it is the fever taking his appetite. She says it is the beginning of the end, and we are to be prepared." Sarah shifted the tray. "She had me bring the broth cold this morning. She said it hardly signifies now." The soup had a skin on it. Rosalind looked at that skin for perhaps 4 seconds, and something in her, some small hard thing inherited from a man who had sat up all night with fishermen's wives in Norwich for a fee of nothing, came awake. "Give it to me," she said. "Miss, I am not to." "Then you did not." Rosalind took the tray. "You saw nothing. Go and see to the linens." She carried it down to the kitchen and made it again herself. Beef broth, hot, with barley and a little salt, in a covered bowl on a clean cloth, and she did it with the cook watching her the whole while and saying nothing, which was the cook's way of permitting a thing. Then she carried it up the east stairs into a wing where she had no business being, and she knocked on the door of a man she had spoken 40 sentences to in 4 years. There was a long silence. "Come," he said. The room was too hot and too dark, and it smelled of a closed window and old smoke. He was sitting up against the pillows in a nightshirt with a coverlet drawn across, and his face in the candlelight was the face she had seen at the head of the dining table on Christmas Eve for 4 years, only without whatever he ordinarily kept in it. He looked at her, and did not manage for a moment to look like an earl. "Miss Wake?" he said. "My lord." She set the tray on the table by the bed. Her hands were perfectly steady, which surprised her. Her heart was not, which did not. The broth came down cold. "This one is not—" "I did not ask for broth." "No," she agreed, and sat down in the chair beside the bed without being invited, which was the single most improper thing she had done since arriving at Thornvale. He stared at her. She took the cloth from the tray and folded it. "My father was a physician. When a man will not eat, one does not argue with him about eating. One sits down and waits, and eventually the smell does the arguing." She looked at him levelly. "The window ought to be open 2 inches. The room is stifling. Whatever is wrong with you, being unable to breathe will not improve it." There was a pause of some length. "Open it," he said. She opened it. Cold air came in across the sill and moved the candle flame, and behind her she heard him let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for several days. She came back and sat down again, and did not say anything at all. That was the thing she had learned from her father, who had learned it from 30 years of frightened people. The talking is not what they want. The staying is what they want. After some minutes, he picked up the spoon. He ate, perhaps half of it. When he set it down, he said, without looking at her, "The others do not sit." "No, my lord." "They stand at the foot. They ask Mrs. Pruitt questions over my head as though I had already gone." His jaw was tight. "My aunt came yesterday. She spent 11 minutes in this room. She spent 2 hours in the muniment room with Crail." Rosalind said nothing. There was nothing a hired woman with a good accent could safely say to that. "You are not asking me anything," he said. "Would you like me to?" "No." Then after a moment, and quieter, "No." She took the tray. At the door she stopped, because he had said her name. "Miss Wake, why did you come up?" She considered several answers and gave him the true one, which was not the safe one. "Because you are ill and no one is treating you as though you were a person it happened to. They are treating you as though it were happening to the house." His face did something then that she could not read. She left before she had to. She lay awake most of that night and told herself she had risked her position for a bowl of soup, and that she was a fool, and that in the morning she would be dismissed. What she did not permit herself to examine was the other thing, the thing that had gone through her when he said her name in that low, flattened voice, which had nothing to do with employment, and which she had no right to at all. She went back the next night, and the night after. It became a thing without either of them naming it. She came at 9, when the house had settled and Mrs. Pruitt had gone to her accounts, and she brought the broth, and sat in the chair and opened the window 2 inches, and she did not ask him how he felt, because she had understood on the first night that nobody had asked him anything in years that was not about the estate. On the second night he was sitting up when she came in, and the window was already open 2 inches, and he did not say anything about it. And neither did she. He ate the whole bowl. When he had finished, he looked at the empty thing for a moment as though it had caught him out. "Hollis came at 4, he said. He held my wrist for a full minute and told me my pulse was tumultuous, was it? It was perfectly ordinary." A pause. He then told Mrs. Pruitt, in the passage at some volume, that it would be a mercy if it were quick. Rosalind took the bowl and set it on the tray and did not permit her face to move, because the alternative was saying what she thought of Dr. Hollis, and a governess does not have opinions about physicians in front of earls. "You are doing it again," he said. "Doing what, my lord?" "Not saying the thing." He was watching her now with an attention she was not accustomed to and had no defense against. "You did it last night. You have a face that arrives at an opinion about 4 seconds before your mouth declines to have it. That is a great deal of observation for a dying man." She heard it leave her mouth and went cold all over. 4 years of carefulness, and she had said that, in that room, to him. He did not throw her out. He looked at the ceiling, and something went across his face that was not quite an expression. "Say it," he said. "Your physician is 71 years old and cannot hear a chest." Rosalind said, "My father would not have let him bleed a horse." The candle guttered. In the silence she could hear the rain finding the gutter above the window, and her own heart which was behaving disgracefully. "Good night, Miss Wake," he said. On the third night the broth was already made when she came down to the kitchen. The cook did not look up from the range. There was a covered bowl on a clean cloth and a fresh candle beside it, and a small dish of barley bread that Rosalind had not asked for and did not mention, and the cook said to the range, "The green door sticks. Lift it as you go," which was the closest thing to a blessing anyone had offered her in 4 years. She lifted it as she went. That night he asked about her father, and she found herself telling him, in a chair, in the dark, about a man who had sat up with a fisherman's wife in Norwich for 3 nights running, and been paid in mackerel, and had thought it a fair exchange. About the Latin, about the piano going out through the front door on a Tuesday. He watched it go. He said from the window, "Did you weep?" "No," Rosalind said. There were men in the street. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "That is the worst thing you have told me." And she had to look at the window for some time after. that they talked about small things. The girls, Anne's, opinions about horses. The Latin Georgiana was refusing to learn, on the grounds that her cousin Vincent had told her at Easter that clever women do not marry. He went very quiet at that. Sharp said that to her. He said, "To her face, my lord, at the breakfast table, and she has repeated it to me 4 times since, which is how I know it took." "Sit down," he said. She had already been sitting. He seemed to notice. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that her cousin was not a scholar and could not be expected to know. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was gone almost at once, and Rosalind's heart did something ridiculous and undignified in her chest, and she looked at the window until it stopped. That was the 4th night. On the 5th night she found out about the miniature. He had fallen asleep. It was the first real sleep he had managed in a week, and she did not wake him. And while she sat there in the chair with her hands folded, she saw that his right hand had come loose from the coverlet, and that there was something in it. A miniature, oval, no bigger than a walnut. The case, worn pale along one edge where a thumb had gone over it 10,000 times. She did not touch it. She looked, because she was human, and she saw that the portrait was not of a woman. It was of a boy, perhaps 4 years old, with straight dark brows. She sat with that for a long while in the dark. Then she went out and shut the door, and stood in the corridor with her hand flat against the wall until her breathing came right. Mrs. Pruitt found her there. Miss Wake, the housekeeper's candle came up. Her face in the light was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was satisfied. In the Earl's wing at 11 at night he was not eating. He is eating now. "That is not your office. Someone's office. It ought to have been, Mrs." Pruitt's chin came up, and her voice, when it came, was perfectly level and perfectly polite. The voice of a woman who had held this house for 40 years and knew precisely what she was, and precisely what Rosalind was not. "You are a hired woman with a good accent, Miss Wake. Do not mistake proximity for standing. When this is over, there will be an accounting, and I should not care to be the governess who was found on the wrong stairs." She went down. Her candle went with her. Rosalind stood in the dark a long time. The boy's name was Edward. She learned it 3 nights later, and she learned it because she asked, which she had promised herself she would not do. He had been talking about the north gallery, which was shut, and he had stopped mid-sentence in the way a man stops when he has walked into a room he did not mean to enter. And Rosalind, who had spent 4 years being careful, was not careful. "Who is the boy in the miniature?" she said. The candle burned down a full 1/4 inch before he answered. "My son." He said the words level. Edward, he was 4. He did not look at her. He looked at the ceiling and told it, and he told it in a flat voice, with no adjectives in it at all, which is how men tell the things that have hollowed them out. There had been a fever in the house in the spring of 1811, a real one. The physician from London had said to keep the child warm and the windows shut, and the room dark. And Julian had done it, because that was what one did, because a man with rank pays for the best advice and then follows it. The boy had been in a room like an oven for 9 days. His wife had begged once to open a window, and Julian had said no, because the physician had said no. And the physician had a name and a reputation and a fee of 40 guineas. Edward had died on the 9th day. His wife had died 14 months later. Of nothing anyone could name, in a house where the 2 of them had stopped speaking about it or about anything. "I opened the window myself, afterward," he said. "In an empty room, 2 inches. Rosalind's hands were shaking. She put them in her lap. He turned his head then and looked at her, and there was nothing in his face that any drawing room in England would have recognized. "You opened it on the first night," he said. "You did not ask. You did it." "I am sorry, my lord." "Do not be sorry." His voice cracked on the second word, and he stopped and mastered it. And the mastering was the worst thing she had ever watched anyone do. There is not a soul in this house who has said his name aloud to me in 3 years. They think it a kindness. It is not a kindness. No. The room was very quiet. Out beyond the window the rain had stopped, and the whole valley was dripping. "Rosalind," he said, her given name in his voice. Just that. She had not heard it from anyone above stairs in 4 years, and it went through her like the first warmth after cold, all pain and no sense at all, and she sat with her hands folded in her lap and did not move a muscle of her face, while her pulse went hard in her throat and her whole body told her a truth. "My lord," she said, "I am not dying." He said it to the ceiling. "There is no fever. There has been no fever since the 2nd of November. There is a brick wrapped in flannel, and Hollis is old and cannot see, and I have been lying in this bed for 9 days, listening to my own house divide my life among itself." Rosalind sat absolutely still. "Say something," he said. "I am deciding," she said, "whether I am more angry at you or at them." He laughed. It was one syllable and it sounded as though it hurt him. "You have let a child of 9 believe her father is dying," Rosalind said. "Georgiana has not slept properly in a week. She asked me on Tuesday whether she ought to write to her cousin Vincent, because he is to be her guardian, and she thought she had better be polite to him first." Everything went out of his face. "That is what your experiment has cost so far," Rosalind said. "I do not care what it has taught you about Mrs. Pruitt. Tell your daughters tomorrow." "I cannot yet." "Why?" "Because Sharp arrives on Friday," he said. "He has invited himself. He is bringing my aunt, and my aunt is bringing Miss Cecily Ward, whom she intends me to marry, and Crail tells me there is a paper going about among the tenants that requires only my signature or my death to become a settlement. I do not know who is holding it." He looked at her. 4 more days. Then I will tell them. I will tell them all at once, and I will do it in front of every person who has spent this fortnight measuring my rooms. She should have argued. She had 100 arguments. 4 days, she said. She did not sleep at all that night. Somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd hour, she stopped pretending that what she felt was professional concern, and admitted to the dark, to nobody, that she wanted him, not his rank, not his protection, not the safety of the place. She wanted the man who had set his son's name to a ceiling, and she was a governess. And there was no version of the world in which that ended in anything but her leaving. She got up at 6 and taught the girls their sums. Vincent Sharp arrived on Friday in a hired chaise with a great deal of luggage, and the manner of a man arriving somewhere he already owned. He was 30, and handsome in a way that did not survive close attention. He shook hands with Mr. Daguerre. "Crail," complimented Mrs. Pruitt on the state of the hall, walked into the drawing-room without being announced, and within an hour had asked 3 separate people how his lordship did, in a voice pitched exactly for the room to hear. Lady Havard came with him, and with Lady Havard came Miss Ward, who was 22 and in ice blue, and who had been told her entire life that she was the correct choice, and who was not, in fact, unkind. She asked Rosalind, on the first evening, whether the girls were well and meant it, and Rosalind found she could not even enjoy disliking her. They dined at 8. Rosalind was not at dinner. Rosalind was in the schoolroom with 2 children, and it was there, at 9:30, that Sarah came to the door with her face white. "Miss, they are in the drawing-room. They have the paper out." Rosalind went down. She had no right to be in that room. She stood in the doorway of the drawing-room at Thornvale Hall, with a slate still in her hand, and there were 14 people in it, and the candles were lit in the sconces, and the fire was up, and it was the most beautiful room in the county, and in the middle of it Mr. Straw. Sharp was standing by the mantel with a folded document and reading out a list of names. "Crail has it that 11 of the tenants would sign tomorrow, which I say only because it must be faced," he was saying. "I take no pleasure in it. My cousin is dying. The estate cannot be permitted to drift. Aunt, you will forgive plain speech." "Plain speech is what is wanted," said Lady Havard. "Then plainly the girls will come to me at Bath. Miss Ward, if she is generous, will find herself mistress here soon enough by another road." A small laugh went around the room. Miss Ward did not join it, and her hand tightened on her fan, and the household will be reduced, Mrs. Byte. Pruitt, you will stay, of course. Thank you, sir. The rest will be reviewed. Sharp's eye came up and found Rosalind in the doorway, and he smiled at her with real warmth, which was the horror of him. The governess, for instance. Rosalind, is it? You will not be needed at Bath. I am afraid I have a woman already. Ah, do not look so stricken. You are a hired woman with a good accent. There are 100 of you in every advertisement in the Morning Post. The room laughed, not cruelly. That was the thing. They laughed the way people laugh at a small, true joke, and Mrs. Pruitt smiled into her collar, and Lady Havard looked away out of tact, and Miss Ward looked at the fire. Rosalind stood in the doorway with the slate in her hands and understood, in her body before her mind, that this was the third time corridor. Stairs. Now here, in front of everyone, with her name in his mouth like a coin he was spending. Yes, sir, she said. There are. She turned to go. Miss Wake. The room went absolutely quiet. The Earl of Thornvale was standing in the far doorway in a coat and a cravat tied by his own hands. Upright, unassisted, with his color perfectly ordinary and his eyes perfectly clear. He had been standing there for some time. Nobody moved. Somewhere in the hall a clock went on with its business. He came into the room. He did not look at his aunt. He did not look at Mr. Crail, who had risen. He did not look at Mrs. Pruitt, whose hand had gone flat against her chest, and stayed there. He crossed the whole length of the carpet in front of 14 people, and he did it slowly, the way a man walks, who has decided that everything after this is different, and the room turned as he passed it the way a field of wheat turns. Lady Havard said, "Julian." He did not stop. A footman by the door, whose name was Thomas and who was 19, took one step back and pressed himself against the wall, as though the wall might absorb him. The fire cracked. Somebody's glass went down on a table with a small, clear sound that seemed, in that silence, enormous. He stopped in front of the governess. Up close she could see that his color was ordinary, and his hands were steady, and that his cravat was tied badly by a man who had not let his valet near him, and that of all the things in that room, the badly tied cravat was the one that undid her. "There is no fever," he said level to the room, without turning round. "There has not been since the 2nd. I wish to see what my house would do." Sharp's document made a small sound against his leg. Nobody spoke. Rosalind watched the room arrive at it in stages. One face, and then another, the way water finds the low places. First Crail, who had suspected, then Miss Ward, whose fan stopped, then Lady Havard, who had spent 11 minutes, then, last and worst, Mrs. Pruitt, who had aired the Dower House on the 4th day and who now understood, with her hand on her chest and 40 years of service behind her, exactly who had been awake in that bed listening. "It did it very well," the Earl said. "Every one of you was competent. My aunt was efficient. Crail was thorough. Mrs. Pruitt had the Dower House aired by the 4th day." He paused. 11 people in this house believed I was dying. One of them came upstairs. He held out his hand. Rosalind looked at it. Her heart was going so hard she thought the room must hear it. She put the slate down on the little table by the door because she had no third hand, and she put her fingers into his, and his hand closed round hers, ungloved, in front of everyone. "Miss Wake will be my wife," he said. "I will hear no discussion of it. 10 words." He did not raise his voice for any of them. The silence afterward had a shape to it, and the shape was the room recalculating. Rosalind heard Miss Ward's fan close. She heard Lady Havard say her nephew's name once, and stop. She heard, from Mrs. Pruitt, a small broken syllable that was not a word at all, and then, a moment later, another, and the housekeeper's hand went out and found the back of a chair and stayed there. Mr. Crail cleared his throat. He was a dry man, and he had been 40 years in the family service, and he had, it turned out, been keeping a ledger of his own opinions after all. "My lord," he said, "as to the paper Mr. Sharp holds, it has no standing. It required a death. I mention it only so that the room understands that nothing has been signed and nothing can be." He looked, without any expression at all, at Sharp. "I have the tenants' letters in the muniment room. I did not act on them. I thought it best to wait until his lordship could read them himself." Sharp said, "Cousin, this is a great deal of theatre over a misunderstanding." "Vincent," the Earl still had not raised his voice, "you told my daughter that clever women do not marry. She is 9. She repeated it to her governess 4 times. He let that sit in the room for a moment. There is a chaise at the door in an hour. Take it." That was all. There was no shouting. Sharp stood by the mantel with his document in his hand, and looked around the room for one ally, and found with a kind of visible arithmetic that there had never been any, only a great many people who had believed a man was dying and had behaved accordingly, and who were now one by one discovering that they would have to live in the same house as what they had done. He went out. The door did not slam. Miss Cecily Ward stood up. She crossed to Rosalind, and she was pale, and she was 22, and it cost her something. "Miss Wake," she said, "I am glad." Then quieter. "Only for her. He never once looked at me." I did wonder where he was looking. She went out after her chaperone with her chin up, and Rosalind thought, with a rush of something she had not expected to feel that night, that she was not a rival at all. She was a girl who had been handed a script. Lady Havard stayed. She sat in her chair by the fire with her hands in her lap, and she said at last, "Julian, the 11 minutes. Was it 11? It was. I see." His aunt looked into the fire for a long moment. She was 61, and she had buried a husband and a brother, and she had come down from London within 40 hours, and it had never once occurred to her, in a life organized entirely around the order of things, that a man wanted to be sat with. "I did not know what to say to you. I have not known what to say to you since Edward." It was the first time the name had been said aloud in that room in 3 years. Rosalind saw the Earl's hand tighten on hers, once, and let go, and felt the whole house shift very slightly on its foundations. "Say it more often," he said. Mrs. Pruitt was still holding the chair. She was not dismissed. That was Rosalind's doing, and it was done 3 days later in the housekeeper's own room, with the door shut and the accounts open on the table between them, and it was the hardest hour of Rosalind's life. "You will want me gone." Mrs. Pruitt said. Her hands were folded. She had been 40 years at Thornvale, and she had aired the dower house on the 4th day, and she knew precisely what she had done. "I would want me gone." "I want the linen counted," Rosalind said, "and I want to know why the east wing chimneys smoke, and I have never in my life ordered dinner for 14 people, and I have 4 years of watching you do it, and no idea how it is done." She kept her voice steady. "It took some doing. You were wrong about him. You were wrong about me. You were not wrong about the linen." Mrs. Pruitt's mouth worked. "I have run this house since he was 7 years old," she said. "When his mother died, I ran it. When the boy died, I ran it. Because somebody had to, and nobody would say the child's name, and I thought that if I kept the order of things exactly as it was." Then she stopped. She was a woman who had not been permitted to finish a sentence like that in 40 years, and she did not know how. "It is not that I did not care for him, Miss Wake. It is that I did not know it was allowed." Rosalind looked at the accounts on the table between them. 4 years of a woman's handwriting, small and even, every column ruled, every farthing accounted for. There was a page for candles. There was a page for coal. There was no page anywhere in any ledger in England for sitting down beside a man and staying. "When Edward was ill," Rosalind said. "Where were you?" Mrs. Pruitt's hands did not move. "Outside the door," she said. 9 days. I had the girls brought down to the kitchen so they should not hear, and I kept the fires, and I turned away the callers, and I sent to London 3 times for the physician's fee, and I did not go in once." Her voice was perfectly level and had gone somewhere far off. "It was not my place to go in. His lordship had a physician of 40 guineas standing at the bed. What was I to say to him? Open the window. Yes, Rosalind said. The words sat in the room a long time. Yes, Mrs. Pruitt said at last. I know it. I have known it every day for 3 years, and I have counted the linen instead. She put her palms flat on the ledger, the way a woman steadies herself on a chair back. I aired the dower house on the 4th day, Miss Wake. I want that said plainly, and I do not want it forgiven quickly. I did it because it was the order of things, and because doing the order of things is the only way I have ever known to love anybody in this house. Then learn another way, Rosalind said. Because I am going to need you, Mrs. Knepp. Pruitt looked up. Sit with him, Rosalind said. That is all it ever was. Sit down and stay. She was married from Thornvale Church on the 11th of December, in a gown that was not new, with 2 girls behind her carrying nothing at all because Anne had refused flowers on the grounds that they would die and Georgiana had refused them out of solidarity. There were 30 people. Mrs. Pruitt did the breakfast, and it was. Everyone agreed. The finest the county had seen, and she stood at the back of the church with her hands folded and her face absolutely still, and cried the entire way through. The snow came in the last week of the year. It came at night, and by morning, the whole valley was white to the tree line, and the girls were insufferable about it. There was a fire in the east sitting room, which had been the coldest room in the house, and was now, by a determined campaign of chimney sweeps and stubbornness, the warmest. Anne was on the hearthrug arguing with a dog. Georgiana was at the table with her Latin, which she had resumed learning without comment sometime in November, and which she was now rather good at. Rosalind sat with her feet under her and watched the snow come down past the window. Julian came in with the miniature in his hand. He had taken to carrying it openly, which was not a small thing. For 3 years it had lived in a breast pocket like a wound he was hiding, and now it sat on the mantel of whatever room he happened to be in, propped against the clock, and the girls asked about their brother, and he answered them. He set it on the mantel. Then he came and stood behind her chair, and put his hand on her shoulder, and she reached up without looking and covered it with her own. The window, he said. It is open. 2 inches. She felt him breathe out, and then he laughed. Very quietly. 1 syllable, and it did not sound as though it hurt him at all. Outside the snow went on falling into the dark, and the house was warm, and the fire was up, and somewhere below them Mrs. Pruitt was counting the linen and getting it right. He had asked to be treated as a man. In the whole of Thornvale one person had thought to. She had thought it was nothing. She had thought it was soup. Thank you for staying to the end of Rosalind's story. If there is a moment in it you will carry with you, it belongs to you now.